My son dumped me in a nursing home because he said I was too ugly to meet his new high society fiancée. He told me my wheelchair and my paralyzed face were an embarrassment he wasn't willing to endure. He thought he could hide me away, a dirty little secret in a state-run facility, while he started his perfect new life. He didn't know that the one thing he wanted most, his inheritance, was something only I could give him. And I decided to deliver my gift in person. At his wedding. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Harriet Dubois, and for a long time I was a singer. This is the story of my final performance and how I made sure my own son was the one left feeling ashamed. The blues ain't a sound, baby, it's a feeling. It's the humid, heavy air of a New Orleans summer night. It's the taste of chicory coffee and the scent of sweet olive drifting over a garden wall. It's the rhythm of a life that's been bruised but never broken. For 67 years I've lived the blues. And for 40 of those years I sang them. My name is Harriet Dubois, and my voice used to fill the smoky, velvet-draped clubs of the French Quarter. They called me Hattie la Voix, Hattie the Voice. I wasn't famous, not in the way the world thinks of fame. But in this city on my stage I was a queen. I sang with the greats, the old men with whiskey in their voices and magic in their fingers. I lived a life of music, of passion, of a joy so fierce it could make the devil himself weep. Then 5 years ago the music stopped. A stroke, the doctors called it. A thief in the night that crept into my brain and stole the left side of my body. It took my ability to walk without a wheelchair. It took the fine motor skills in my left hand, the one that used to dance over the piano keys. And it left the left side of my face in a state of permanent slight paralysis. A subtle droop at the corner of my mouth that turned my smile into a lopsided, bittersweet thing. But it didn't take my voice. And it damn sure didn't take my spirit. I still lived in the same shotgun house in the Treem neighborhood that I had shared with my late husband, a brilliant, kind-hearted jazz pianist named Marcus. The house was filled with music, with books, with the ghosts of 1,000 beautiful jam sessions. My wheelchair had left its own tracks on the polished hardwood floors. A new kind of rhythm in our old life. I was independent. I was proud. And I was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a woman to be pitied. My world was small, but it was rich. Its capital was the sun-drenched kitchen where my best friend Florence Jackson and I would spend our afternoons. Florence was a retired nurse, a woman with a laugh that could shake the rafters and a loyalty so fierce it was a physical force. She had been my rock since the stroke. My co-conspirator in the grand adventure of growing old. She was the one who helped me navigate the infuriating bureaucracy of Medicare, the one who would show up with a bag of fresh beignets and a scandalous piece of neighborhood gossip, the one who saw not a disabled woman in a wheelchair but her Hattie. My son Jonathan saw something else entirely. Jonathan was my only child, my beautiful, brilliant boy who had escaped New Orleans the moment he could. He lived in Boston now, in a world of granite and steel, a world as far from the languid, soulful rhythm of the Quarter as you could get. He worked in finance, a job I didn't understand, for a company with a name that sounded like a cough. He had spent his entire adult life trying to sand down the rough, vibrant edges of his New Orleans upbringing, to smooth them into something that would fit into the sleek, polished world of the Boston elite. He had changed his accent, his wardrobe, his very way of being. He loved me, I knew, but he loved me from a safe, respectable distance. He loved me in a way that felt a lot like shame. He would call every Sunday, his voice a brisk, efficient thing. "How are you feeling, mother? Are you taking your medication? Is Florence checking in on you?" The questions were a checklist, a perfunctory fulfillment of his filial duty. He never asked about my music, about my friends, about the life I was still living so fiercely within the confines of my new reality. He only asked about the mechanics of my survival. I knew he was embarrassed by me. I had known it for years. After the stroke, his visits became less frequent. When he did come, he would never take me to the new trendy restaurants he wanted to try. We would eat in quiet, out-of-the-way places, where there was less chance of him running into someone from his new important world. He couldn't bear the thought of having to explain his mother, the old black jazz singer in a wheelchair with the crooked smile. I was a proud woman. I never let him see that it hurt. I would just smile my lopsided smile, my spirit unbroken, and I would tell him stories of the old days, trying to remind him of the vibrant, joyful world he had come from. A world where a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account or their address, but by the music in their soul. It was a lesson I was beginning to fear that he had long since forgotten. But the final, most brutal lesson was one he had yet to teach me. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. It was not our scheduled Sunday call, which in itself was unusual. Jonathan was a man of rigid routine. I was in my garden, a collection of raised beds that Florence had helped me build so I could reach them from my wheelchair, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil, when my phone buzzed from the basket on my lap. "Jonathan, baby," I said, my voice warm with a surprise and pleasure I couldn't hide. "What a nice surprise." "Mother," he said, his voice tight, formal. There was none of the usual perfunctory warmth. This was a business call. "I have some news. I'm calling to inform you that I am engaged to be married." The words were a small, happy shock. Engaged. My son, my 40-year-old career-obsessed son, had finally found someone. A flood of maternal joy washed over me, so pure and so potent that it momentarily erased the distance, the shame, the years of quiet hurt. "Oh, Jonathan, that's wonderful news," I exclaimed, my heart swelling. "A wedding? Who is she? Tell me everything." "Her name is Ashley Davenport," he said, and the way he said her name with a kind of reverent, careful precision, told me everything I needed to know. This was not a name like Dubois or Jackson. This was a name that came with a history, a pedigree. A name that weighed more than mine. "The Davenports are a very old, very respected family here in Boston," he continued, a note of pride, of accomplishment in his voice. "Her father is a senior partner at a major law firm. They have a house on Beacon Hill and a summer home in Nantucket. She's a wonderful woman, Mother. She's perfect." Perfect. The word hung in the air, a cold, clinical assessment. He wasn't describing a woman he loved. He was describing a prize he had won, a final, validating acquisition in his long, arduous climb up the social ladder. "Well, I can't wait to meet this perfect woman," I said, my own joy still stubbornly trying to push through the strange, cold formality of the conversation. "When are you bringing her to New Orleans? I'll cook her a proper Creole dinner. We'll show her the real city, not that tourist nonsense on Bourbon Street." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, heavy, uncomfortable silence. "Well, that's the other reason I'm calling, Mother," he finally said, his voice dropping, the brisk, professional tone now replaced by something else. A kind of cold, clinical detachment, the voice of a surgeon about to deliver a devastating diagnosis. "Ashley and I will be coming down to New Orleans next month," he said, "to meet you. But before we do, there are some arrangements that need to be made." "Arrangements?" I asked, a tendril of unease beginning to curl in my stomach. "What kind of arrangements?" "Arrangements concerning you, Mother," he said. "Concerning your situation. We need to make sure you are presentable." Presentable. The word was a slap in the face. I, Harriet Dubois, who had stood on stages in custom-made gowns, who had commanded the attention of entire rooms with the power of my voice, was being told I needed to be made presentable. "I don't understand, Jonathan," I said, my voice growing cold. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your appearance, Mother," he said, his voice now sharp with an impatience he was no longer trying to hide. "I'm talking about this whole jazz singer stroke survivor narrative. It's a lot for someone like Ashley to take in. The Davenports are a very traditional family. They value discretion, perfection." The ugly, unspoken truth of his shame, the truth I had lived with for 5 years, was finally beginning to surface, crawling out from under the rock of his polite weekly phone calls. "I'm not a narrative, Jonathan," I said, my voice shaking with a new rising anger. "I am your mother. And I am her fiancée," he shot back, his voice hard as steel. "I am about to become a part of her family. And I will not have you in your current state jeopardize that. I've worked too hard. I've come too far. So, I'm telling you now before we come down there that things are going to have to be different. We need a plan. A way to manage your condition. A way to present you that is appropriate." The painful phone call had just become an ultimatum. He wasn't just ashamed of me. He was actively planning to manage me, to package me, to present me in a way that would be palatable to his new, perfect high society family. He was telling me that I, in my raw, authentic, broken but unbowed state, was not good enough. I was a problem to be solved, an unsightly variable in the perfect equation of his new life. The joy of his engagement had turned to ash in my mouth. The conversation with Jonathan left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I sat in my garden, the sun warm on my face, but a deep, internal chill had settled into my bones. Presentable. Appropriate. The words were a poison, seeping into the cracks of my pride, the pride that had been my armor for so long. I didn't tell Florence about the call right away. I was too ashamed. Ashamed that my own son, my own flesh and blood, could see me as something to be managed, something to be hidden away. I tried to convince myself that I had misunderstood, that he was just being clumsy, that his love for this new woman had made him temporarily insane. But the follow-up email arrived the next day, and it erased any hope of a misunderstanding. It was a detailed, bullet-pointed list, a corporate strategy for managing his disabled mother. Subject: visit preparations. Mother. Following up on our conversation, I have outlined a few key action items to ensure a smooth and successful visit with Ashley. Wardrobe. Please ensure you have a selection of conservative, modern attire. The bohemian, artistic look is not appropriate. I will have a stylist from Saks send a few options to the house. Please wear them. Accommodations. We will not be staying at the house. I have booked a suite at the Windsor Court. It is more suitable for Ashley's expectations. Narrative. When we are with Ashley, we will not be discussing your past as a jazz singer. It is a colorful history but not one that is relevant to my current life. We will refer to you as a retired music teacher. It is more respectable. Mobility. We will need to carefully manage your public appearances. The wheelchair is conspicuous. We will limit our outings to places that are discreet and easily accessible, to minimize any potential awkwardness. I trust you will understand that these measures are necessary. This is the most important step of my life and I cannot afford any missteps. I am counting on your cooperation. Jonathan. I read the email once, then twice, my anger a slow rising tide. A stylist. A prepared narrative. Managing my mobility. He was not just ashamed of me, he was actively trying to erase me. He wanted to replace Harriet Dubois, Hattie Lavoix, with a sanitized, respectable, wheelchair-bound old woman in a sensible dress. He was trying to stage manage my own life, to turn me into a minor, non-speaking character in the grand production of his social ascent. That evening my anger finally boiled over. I called him. He answered, his voice brisk and businesslike. Mother. Did you receive my email? I did, Jonathan, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I could no longer contain. And I have a few questions. What part of my life exactly is so offensive to you? Is it the music I made? The home I built? The color of my skin? Or is it just the fact that I had the audacity to have a stroke and not die discreetly? There was a cold silence on the other end of the line. You are being hysterical, he finally said, his voice dripping with condescension. No, Jonathan, I shot back. I am being a mother who is trying to understand why her son is treating her like a dirty little secret he needs to hide from his new, perfect fiancée. Because you are, he suddenly shouted, the carefully constructed facade of his calm, corporate demeanor cracking, revealing the ugly, raw truth underneath. You are a secret. You are a problem. Do you have any idea who these people are? The Davenports? They don't come from a world of smoky jazz clubs and shotgun houses in the Treem. They come from a world of charity balls and Ivy League endowments. They are perfect. Their lives are perfect. Their family is perfect. He took a ragged breath, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. And then there's you, my mother. A retired blues singer, paralyzed in a wheelchair with a crooked face. You are the opposite of perfect. You are a walking, talking tragedy. You are a story I will have to spend the rest of my life explaining. The words were a physical blow. A crooked face. A walking, talking tragedy. He had finally said it. The ugly, unvarnished truth of his shame. So you're ashamed of me, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a vast, empty coldness. Ashamed? He laughed, a short, ugly, bitter sound. Ashamed doesn't even begin to cover it. I am terrified. I am terrified that they will see you and they will see where I come from and they will decide that I am not good enough. That I am just some charity case from the swamps of Louisiana who got lucky. He paused, and his next words were the ones that would haunt me for the rest of my days. So yes, mother, he said, his voice as cold and dead as a winter sky. I am ashamed. You are a liability. You are too broken. You are too ugly for the life I'm trying to build. And I will not let you ruin it for me. The ugly truth was finally revealed, in all its brutal, heartbreaking clarity. I was not his mother. I was a stain on his perfect new life, a stain he was desperate to remove. I didn't know then how far he was willing to go to do it. I hung up the phone, my hand numb, my entire body trembling with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. The conversation with Jonathan had stripped away the last lingering vestiges of my maternal denial. He didn't just resent my condition, he was repulsed by it. He saw my disability not as a part of me but as a flaw, a stain, a direct threat to the perfect manicured world he was so desperate to inhabit. I called Florence, my voice a broken, hollow thing, and told her everything. Her reaction was a volcanic eruption of pure, undiluted rage. "That ungrateful, snake-bellied little coward," she roared over the phone, her voice so loud I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "After everything you've done for him, I will get on a plane to Boston and I will slap that boy back to his senses." "It's too late for that, Flo," I whispered. "He's made his choice. He's chosen them." "So what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice softening with a fierce, protective concern. "I'm going to be myself," I said, a new, fragile resolve forming in the wreckage of my heart. "I am Harriet Dubois. I am a jazz singer. I am a stroke survivor. I am a proud black woman from the Treem. And if that is not good enough for his perfect high society fiancé, then that is his problem, not mine. I will not be hidden. I will not be managed. And I will not be made to feel ashamed of who I am." I told Jonathan as much in a short, firm email the next day. "Jonathan," I wrote, my fingers steady on the keyboard, "I will not be adhering to your preparations. I am your mother. I will welcome your fiancé into my home as myself. I will not change my clothes, my history, or my reality to suit her or her family. If that is unacceptable to you, then perhaps it is best that you do not come at all. Mother." I hit send and it felt like a declaration of independence. It was a small act of defiance, but it was mine. I had drawn a line in the sand. I had no idea he was about to respond by burying me under it. For 2 days there was silence. No angry phone call, no scathing email. I began to hope, foolishly, that my words had gotten through to him, that he had perhaps found a sliver of the conscience I had tried so hard to instill in him. The knock on the door came on a Friday morning. I wheeled myself to the door and opened it to find 2 people on my porch. A man in a nondescript suit and a woman from the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals. "Mrs. Harriet Dubois?" the woman asked, her expression a mixture of professional sympathy and clinical detachment. "Yes," I said, a knot of confusion and dread tightening in my stomach. "Ma'am," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We have a court order here. It's a commitment order, based on a petition filed by your son Jonathan Dubois. We're here to escort you to the Crescent City Care Facility." The words didn't make sense. A commitment order. A nursing home. It was a mistake. A horrible bureaucratic nightmare. "There must be some mistake," I stammered. "My son lives in Boston. I am perfectly fine." The woman just shook her head sadly and handed me a thick sheaf of papers. "It's all in here, ma'am. The petition states that you have been suffering from delusions, that your stroke has led to a severe cognitive decline, and that you have become a danger to yourself. Your son has been granted full power of attorney to manage your medical and financial affairs." Power of attorney. The document I had signed 5 years ago, right after the stroke, giving him the power to make medical decisions for me if I was incapacitated. I had signed it out of love and trust, never imagining he would twist it into a weapon, a tool to strip me of my own life. He had done it. He had found a way to make me presentable. He was going to hide me away in a state-run nursing home, a place for the forgotten, the discarded. He had presented my defiance, my refusal to be managed, as proof of my insanity. He had used my love and my trust to legally and forcibly erase me. It was the ultimate betrayal. A betrayal so cold, so calculated, so monstrous, that it was almost beyond comprehension. They didn't let me call Florence. They didn't let me pack a bag. They just took me. The man in the suit and the woman with the sad eyes escorted me from my home, from my life, and put me in the back of a sterile white van. As we drove away, I looked back at my little shotgun house, at my garden, at the life I had built. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my son had not just put me in a nursing home. He had buried me alive. The Crescent City Care Facility was not a place of care. It was a place of waiting. A long, dim hallway where the forgotten elderly of New Orleans were parked to wait for the end. The air smelled of bleach and despair. The silence was broken only by the low, constant murmur of a television and the occasional mournful cry from a resident lost in the fog of dementia. It was my prison. My tomb. They took my clothes and gave me a thin, faded hospital gown. They took my purse, my phone, my connection to the outside world. I was no longer Harriet Dubois, Hattie Lavoix. I was just a number. A resident. A case file. My protests, my insistence that I was of sound mind, were met with the gentle, patronizing smiles of the overworked, underpaid staff. Now, Harriet, the head nurse would say, patting my hand. Your son is just worried about you. He wants what's best for you. My son. The architect of my destruction. He had covered his tracks with a chilling legal precision. He had provided the court with fabricated emails with a statement from a concerned neighbor he had likely paid off, all painting a picture of a woman who had lost her grip on reality. He had used my stroke, my partial paralysis, as proof of my supposed incompetence. For the first few days I was lost in a fog of shock and despair. I would sit in my wheelchair in the corner of the drab common room and stare at the wall, my spirit a flickering, guttering flame. And then Florence found me. She arrived like a hurricane, a force of pure, righteous fury that swept through the quiet, desolate halls of the nursing home. She had been calling my house for days, and when I didn't answer she had known with the certainty of a lifelong friend that something was terribly wrong. It had taken her 2 days of frantic, desperate searching, of calling hospitals and police stations, before she had finally tracked me down. When she saw me in my faded gown, my face a pale, slack mask of grief, her own face crumpled. But her tears lasted only a moment, quickly replaced by a look of such ferocious, protective anger that it seemed to shake the very air around her. That little bastard, she hissed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. That cowardly, money-grubbing little snake. Oh, I am going to end him, Hattie. I swear on your husband's grave I am going to end him. She immediately went to war. She demanded to see the head nurse, the facility administrator, anyone who would listen. She brandished her own credentials as a retired nurse, her voice booming with an authority they could not ignore. This woman is my friend, she declared, her finger jabbing the air. I have known her for 50 years. She is more lucid and intelligent than your entire staff combined. This is an illegal commitment and you are all complicit. But Jonathan had built his cage well. The court order was legal. The power of attorney was valid. Florence was not family. She had no legal standing. They politely but firmly showed her the door. But Florence Jackson was not a woman who was easily deterred. If she couldn't break down the front door, she would find a back window. Her fury cooled into a quiet, methodical investigation. She started visiting me every day, not just as a friend but as a nurse, an advocate, an investigator. She would bring me real food, smuggling in gumbo and red beans and rice, a taste of the life I had lost. And while she was there she would observe. She was a trained professional and she saw the things that a casual visitor would miss. She saw the understaffing, the long response times to call buttons, the small, subtle signs of neglect. She started documenting everything. She would arrive with a newspaper and a pen and she would make meticulous notes. The time it took for a nurse to respond to a resident's call for help. The quality of the food. The cleanliness of the bathrooms. She spoke to the other residents, the ones who were still lucid, listening to their stories, their complaints, their quiet, desperate loneliness. She also started digging into Jonathan's story. She hired a private investigator, a friend of her late husband's, to look into the concerned neighbor, who had provided a statement against me. It took the PI less than a day to discover that the neighbor was a man with a gambling problem, who had received a mysterious $5,000 deposit into his bank account the day after he signed the affidavit. Florence was building a case, piece by painful piece. She was my ally, my army, my hope. Her daily visits were the one thing that kept me from surrendering to the despair of my situation. She was my connection to the world I had lost and my only hope of ever getting it back. And in the quiet, desperate hours of the night, in the tomb my son had built for me, a new, cold and powerful idea began to form in my own mind. He had taken my freedom. He had taken my home. But he had forgotten about one last thing. He had forgotten about the one thing he wanted most in the world. And I was the only one who could give it to him. The days in the nursing home bled into a monotonous, gray river of indignity. The routine was a soul-crushing cycle of bland meals, condescending nurses, and the endless blaring drone of the television in the common room. I was surrounded by the ghosts of people, their bodies still present but their minds long since departed. It was a place designed to strip you of your identity, to sand you down into a compliant, manageable patient. But my son had underestimated me. He had forgotten who I was. I was not just a disabled old woman. I was Hattie Lavoix. I was a woman who had commanded stages, who had stared down rowdy drunks and slick club owners. I was a survivor. And in the depths of my despair, my survival instinct, honed over a lifetime of living the blues, kicked in. The grief and the shock began to harden into a cold, strategic resolve. I began to think. I began to plan. Florence was building a case from the outside, a case based on neglect and perjury. But I needed a weapon of my own, something more personal, more powerful. A trump card. And then, in the middle of one long sleepless night, I remembered it. The trust fund. My husband, Marcus, had been a brilliant musician, but he had also been a surprisingly shrewd man with his money. He had come from a family with a little bit of old Creole money, and he had invested it wisely over the years. Before he died, he had set up a trust fund for Jonathan. It wasn't a massive fortune, but it was a substantial amount, a sum that would be a life-changing windfall for a man as obsessed with wealth as my son. But Marcus had also been a deeply perceptive man. He had seen the seeds of Jonathan's social climbing, his insecurity, his shame of his own roots, long before I had been willing to admit it to myself. And he had been worried. "This money can be a blessing or a curse, Hattie," he had told me as we sat with his lawyer signing the final papers for the trust. I wanted to be a foundation for him, not a shortcut. I don't want him to become one of those empty men who mistakes a high price tag for high character. And so he had insisted on a special clause. A morality clause, the lawyer had called it. I remembered it clearly now, the strange, archaic language of the legal document. The trust was to be managed by me as the sole trustee. The funds were to be released to Jonathan on his 40th birthday, but only under one very specific condition. The clause stated that the funds could only be disbursed if the trustee, myself, could attest in a notarized written statement that Jonathan had proven himself to be a man of sound character, moral integrity, and demonstrated loyalty to the family that raised him. It specifically mentioned his duty to honor and care for his mother in her time of need. If, in the sole and absolute judgment of the trustee, he had failed to meet these conditions, the trust was to be dissolved, and the entire sum was to be donated to the New Orleans Musicians Benevolent Fund, a charity Marcus had supported his entire life. It was a hidden trump card. A final test of character from a father to his son. And I was the one who held all the power. The only physical copy of that specific notarized clause was in a safe deposit box at a small local bank, a box for which I had the only key. Jonathan knew about the trust's existence, of course. He had been counting on that money, that 40th birthday windfall, for years. But I had never told him about the morality clause. It was a secret between me, my late husband, and his lawyer. A slow, cold, and beautiful smile spread across my face, my real lopsided smile for the first time in weeks. My son, in his greedy, desperate attempt to secure his perfect high society life, had made a fatal error. He had locked away the one person who held the key to his financial future. He had put the trustee in a cage. The next time Florence visited, I told her everything. Her eyes, which had been filled with a righteous fury, now lit up with a new, brilliant, strategic light. "Oh, Hattie," she breathed, a look of pure, unadulterated admiration on her face. "You're Marcus. That magnificent man. He knew. He knew all along." The plan began to form, a beautiful, intricate piece of jazz improvisation. We weren't just going to get me out of this place. We were going to give Jonathan the public reckoning he so richly deserved. My despair was gone, replaced by the thrilling, electric energy of a performer about to take the stage for the most important show of her life. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a woman with a secret. A secret that was about to become the instrument of my son's final and most public humiliation. He had thought he was burying me. He had no idea he was just giving me time to plan my own resurrection. The first move in our new quiet war was to let the enemy come to us. We knew that Jonathan, in his meticulous sociopathic planning, would have to present his fiancée, Ashley, with a sanitized, tragic story about his mother. He would paint me as a beloved but sadly deteriorated figure, a woman lost to the fog of her own mind, safely and lovingly cared for in a top-notch facility. And we knew that Ashley, a woman from a world where philanthropy and public acts of charity were a form of social currency, would eventually have to make an appearance. She would have to perform her own role as the compassionate, concerned daughter-in-law to be. She would have to pay a visit to the poor, sick old woman. It was a box that had to be ticked on her pre-wedding checklist. We just had to be patient. And we had to be ready. Florence became my co-conspirator, my stage manager. She smuggled in my own clothes, one piece at a time. Not the sensible drab things Jonathan's stylist had tried to send, but my clothes. A vibrant silk scarf. A well-cut, comfortable but elegant tunic. My mother's pearl earrings. He brought my makeup, my favorite deep red lipstick. She even brought a small battery-powered hot roller set. "If you're going to hold court, Hattie," she'd said with a grin, "you need to look like a queen." I also began to work the room. I was no longer the silent, grieving woman in the corner. I was Hattie Lavoix again. I started talking to the other residents, the ones who were still lucid. I listened to their stories, I learned their names, I shared my own sanitized, carefully crafted version of my story. I told them my son was a wonderful, if slightly overprotective, man who worried about me too much. I became a beloved, charming figure in the dreary landscape of the nursing home, the witty, elegant jazz singer who always had a kind word and a sharp observation. I was building my audience. The call came on a Tuesday. The head nurse informed me, with a note of surprise in her voice, that I had a visitor scheduled for the following afternoon. A Miss Ashley Davenport. Showtime. That next day Florence arrived early. She did my hair, setting it in soft, elegant waves. She helped me with my makeup, a touch of powder, a hint of blush, and my signature defiant red lipstick. I put on my favorite turquoise tunic and the pearl earrings. I was not a patient. I was a woman holding court. When the nurse came to wheel me to the private visiting room, she stopped in her tracks. "My goodness, Harriet," she said. "You look beautiful." "I know, baby," I said with a wink. Ashley Davenport was exactly as I had pictured her. Tall, thin, and exquisitely dressed in a beige cashmere sweater set that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek, perfect chignon. She was the very picture of old money, East Coast elegance. And she was radiating an aura of polite, charitable condescension. She came towards me, her hand outstretched, a perfect, practiced smile on her face. "Mrs. Dubois," she said, her voice a light, airy thing. "I'm Ashley. It is such an honor to finally meet you. Jonathan has told me so much about you." "Has he now?" I said, my voice a low, smooth purr. I took her hand. My grip was surprisingly strong. "Please call me Harriet. All my friends do." She sat in the uncomfortable armchair opposite my wheelchair, looking around the small, sterile room with a faint, barely concealed look of distaste. "Jonathan has been so worried about you," she said, launching into her prepared script. "He feels just terrible that he had to make this difficult decision. But your health and safety are his #1 priority." "Oh, I know," I said, my voice full of a warm maternal understanding. "He's a good boy, my Jonathan. A little overprotective, perhaps. He gets it from his father. His father always wanted to wrap me in cotton wool, too." I was already beginning my performance. I was not the delusional, incompetent woman she had been led to expect. I was witty, I was charming, I was in complete command of my faculties. And I was subtly, gently beginning to rewrite the narrative. She was visibly taken aback. She had come here for a quick 20-minute charity visit with a senile old woman. She had not expected a conversation. She had not expected a personality. She had not expected me. The first seed of doubt had been planted. And I was just getting warmed up. Ashley Davenport was a woman who was used to being in control. She moved through the world with the easy, unshakable confidence of someone who has never had a door closed in her face. But as she sat across from me in that sterile little visiting room, I could see the first faint cracks appearing in her perfect, polished facade. She had come expecting a tragedy. She had found a performance. And she was no longer the star of the show. "Jonathan tells me you were a music teacher," she said, trying to steer the conversation back to the safe, respectable narrative he had clearly prepared for her. Oh, that's my son's polite way of putting it, I said with a low, throaty chuckle. I was a singer, baby. A jazz singer. I sang the blues. In all the smoky, wonderful, disreputable clubs in the French Quarter. I had a voice that could make a man leave his wife, and a smile that could make him glad he did. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, shock, fascination, and a hint of disapproval. This was not in the script. My husband, Marcus, was my pianist, I continued, my voice growing soft with a genuine, heartfelt nostalgia. A brilliant man. He could make a piano weep. We had a life, him and I. A real life, full of music and passion and a whole lot of soul. It's a world away from the life my Jonathan has chosen for himself in Boston. All that finance. It seems so gray to me. I was painting a picture for her. A picture of a vibrant, authentic world that was the absolute antithesis of her own. I was showing her the roots her future husband had tried so desperately to sever. He's a good boy, though, I said, my tone shifting to one of a loving, slightly sad mother. He's always been so ambitious. So driven. He wants so badly to be a success. To make his father proud. His father. He was a man of very high expectations. This was a lie, of course. My Marcus was the kindest, most supportive father a boy could have asked for. But I was creating a new narrative, a new psychological profile for her to consider. Jonathan has always been a little insecure, I said, my voice dropping to a confidential whisper, as if I were sharing a secret with a new friend. He feels like he has to prove himself, especially when it comes to money. He's always been so ashamed that we weren't, like your family. I could see her processing this new information, her sharp, intelligent mind trying to fit it into the picture she had of her fiancé. The strong, confident, successful man she knew was being reframed as a boy with a chip on his shoulder, a man driven by a deep-seated insecurity. I do worry about him, I sighed, looking at her with my most sincere maternal expression. He puts so much pressure on himself. He's so protective of me, especially since the stroke. A little too protective, if you ask me. I gestured around the drab little room. He insisted on this place. The best care, he said. I told him I was perfectly fine at home with my friend Florence, but you know Jonathan. Once he gets an idea in his head, there's no changing his mind. He just wants to know that I'm safe. That everything is handled. I was giving her a new, more palatable explanation for my presence in this place. It wasn't that I was crazy. It was that my son was a little neurotic. A little overbearing in his love for his dear old mother. It was a version of the story that made him look not cruel but devoted. And it was a version that she could accept without having to question her own judgment in choosing him as a partner. For the next hour I held her captive. I told her stories of the old New Orleans, of the music, of the magic. I made her laugh with a story about a time I had to chase a drunk tourist out of a club with a microphone stand. I made her eyes widen with tales of the colorful, brilliant, and sometimes dangerous characters who had populated my world. I was performing. I was giving her the full Hattie a la Voix experience, and she was mesmerized. She had come to a nursing home to visit a patient. She had found herself in a private audience with the Queen. By the time her visit was over, her entire demeanor had changed. The polite, charitable condescension was gone, replaced by a look of genuine, if slightly confused, fascination. She had come to pity me. She was leaving, I could tell, in a state of awe. As she stood to leave, she took my hand. "Harriet," she said, her voice full of a new, real warmth. "It was a true pleasure to meet you. You are a remarkable woman." "You're a sweet girl, Ashley," I said, patting her hand. "You take care of my boy for me. He's more fragile than he looks." She left, and the moment the door closed behind her, the smile dropped from my face. The performance had been exhausting, but it had been a triumph. I had not only challenged Jonathan's narrative, I had completely rewritten it. I had shown his perfect high society fiancé that I was not a liability to be hidden, but a force to be reckoned with. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and now it was time to give them a little water. The visit from Ashley was the first crack in the wall of my prison. The second came a week later in the form of a phone call. It was Jonathan. But his tone was different. The cold, clinical detachment was gone, replaced by a note of strained, anxious confusion. "Mother," he began, "I spoke to Ashley. She enjoyed her visit with you." "She's a lovely girl, Jonathan," I said, my voice warm and serene. A little uptight perhaps, but she has a good heart. You've chosen well. She said you were very charming, he said, the word sounding strange in his mouth as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he didn't understand. She said you seemed perfectly fine. Well, of course I'm fine, baby, I said with a light, airy laugh. I have a little trouble with my left side, but my mind is as sharp as it ever was. I told you you worry too much. I was playing my part to perfection. The loving, slightly eccentric mother, bemused by her overly cautious son. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. His fiancée's perception of me was now in direct conflict with the narrative of the delusional, incompetent woman he had so carefully constructed. She mentioned that you talked about the old days, he said, a new cautious note in his voice. Oh, we had a wonderful chat, I said. I told her all about her future father-in-law, my Marcus, and about the life we built here. I think it's important for her to understand the stock she's marrying into. The passion, the music, the soul. I was deliberately using the language he had tried so hard to escape, the language of authenticity and emotion that was so alien to the cold corporate world he now inhabited. I was reminding him, and by extension his fiancée, of the life he had rejected. And then I delivered the masterstroke. The move that Florence and I had so carefully rehearsed. I also wanted to put her mind at ease about your financial future, I said, my voice dropping into a confidential, motherly tone. I know how important security is to a young woman like Ashley, especially coming from her background. What did you tell her? He asked, his voice suddenly sharp with alarm. Oh, just the truth, baby, I said breezily. I just mentioned the small family trust that your father set up for you. I told her not to worry, that you would be well taken care of on your 40th birthday, as long as everything was in order. The silence on the other end of the line was so profound, I could hear the hum of the electrical wires. I had just lit a very long, very slow-burning fuse. You told her about the trust? He finally stammered. Of course, I said, my voice a picture of maternal innocence. Why wouldn't I? She's about to be your wife. She has a right to know that you come from a family with some means. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Jonathan. Your father worked hard for that money. I paused, then added the final, devastatingly casual line. Of course, as the trustee, the final decision to release the funds is still up to me. But I'm sure we'll have no problems with that. As long as I'm confident that you're making good, honorable life choices. I had just armed Ashley with a piece of information that would change the entire dynamic of their relationship. The trust fund, the one Jonathan had been counting on, the one he had likely been using as a promise of his future wealth, was not a guarantee. It was a prize that was contingent on the approval of the very woman he had locked away in a nursing home. He was trapped. He couldn't tell Ashley the truth about why I was here without revealing himself to be a monster. But now, every day that I remained in this facility, every day he continued this charade, was a day that potentially jeopardized his access to a fortune. The seeds of doubt had not just been planted in Ashley's mind. They had been planted in his own. He had thought he was in control, that he had successfully managed and contained the problem of his embarrassing mother. Now he was beginning to realize that the problem was not contained at all. In fact, the problem was the one holding all the cards. The phone call ended with his strained, choked goodbyes. I hung up, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The performance was over. The psychological warfare had begun. He had thought he could make me disappear. He was about to find out that I was going to be the most expensive, most consequential person in his entire carefully constructed life. The wedding was to be the society event of the Boston summer season. According to the gossip columns Florence now read to me with glee over the phone, it was to be a lavish, no-expense-spared affair at a historic mansion on Beacon Hill. The guest list was a who's who of Boston's old money elite. It was to be the final triumphant coronation of Jonathan Du Bois, the boy from the Treem, as a member of the city's aristocracy. Of course I was not invited. My absence was explained away, I was sure, by a carefully crafted story of my own tragic but necessary institutionalization. I was the sad, secret footnote to his perfect day. But Florence and I had other plans. The first step was getting me out of the nursing home. Florence, with her years of experience navigating the medical system, found our loophole. Every resident was entitled to attend outside medical appointments, accompanied by a family member or a designated caregiver. Florence, as my lifelong friend and a retired nurse, was officially on my records as my designated caregiver. She scheduled an appointment for me with a fictitious cardiology specialist in a medical building downtown. The appointment was for a Friday afternoon. The wedding was on a Saturday. In Boston. The plan was a logistical masterpiece of rebellion. On that Friday, Florence arrived at the nursing home, her face a mask of professional concern. "I'm here to take Mrs. Dubois to her heart specialist," she told the head nurse. They released me into her care, no questions asked. But we didn't go to the doctor's office. We went directly to the airport, where Florence had booked 2 first-class tickets to Boston, paid for with her own credit card. "This is the best money I've ever spent," she'd said with a grin. We flew to Boston, 2 old women on a mission, my wheelchair checked as baggage. We checked into a small, discreet hotel near the wedding venue. The next day, while the wedding ceremony was taking place, Florence and I prepared for my surprise appearance at the reception. We had a hairdresser come to the room. We had my dress, a beautiful custom-made gown of deep royal blue velvet that I had worn on stage for my final performance years ago, which Florence had retrieved from my house and had tailored to fit me perfectly. It was elegant, regal, and utterly defiant. As Florence helped me with my makeup, applying my signature red lipstick, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back was older, her face bearing the lopsided map of her stroke, but her eyes were shining with a fire I thought had been extinguished long ago. I was not a patient. I was not a victim. I was Hattie Lavoix. And I was about to take the stage one last time. We arrived at the reception just as the cocktail hour was in full swing. The mansion was a palace of white marble and glittering chandeliers, filled with the sound of a string quartet and the low, confident murmur of Boston's upper crust. Florence pushed my wheelchair through the grand, arched doorway. And the room, as if on cue, fell silent. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. 100 conversations stopped mid-sentence. 100 heads turned. 100 pairs of eyes, all of them blue-blooded and pedigreed, fixed on the unexpected, and to them shocking sight of a regal, beautifully dressed, elderly black woman in a wheelchair, who had just appeared in their midst as if from another world. I saw Jonathan first. He was standing across the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing with his new father-in-law. His eyes met mine, and his face, which had been flushed with triumph, turned the color of ash. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Then I saw Ashley. She was standing with a group of her bridesmaids, a vision in white lace. She stared at me, her perfect, beautiful face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. I just smiled my lopsided smile and held my head high. I was not an intruder. I was a guest. An uninvited one perhaps, but a guest nonetheless. Florence, with the confidence of an admiral steering a battleship, began to push my wheelchair into the center of the room. The crowd parted for us, a sea of confused, whispering faces. We were a spectacle, a mystery, a piece of theater that had just crashed their perfect, predictable party. We reached the center of the room and I saw Ashley's parents, the formidable Davenports, approaching us, their faces a mixture of confusion and cold, polite fury. Before they could say a word, I spoke, my voice, though not as strong as it once was, still carrying the rich, resonant timbre of a singer. "Good evening," I said, my voice filling the silent room. "I do apologize for my late arrival. The flight from New Orleans was a bit delayed." I looked around at the stunned faces. "I am Harriet Dubois. I am the groom's mother. And I wouldn't have missed my son's wedding for the world." The surprise appearance had been a success. I had thrown a grenade into the middle of their perfect high society party. And now it was time to pull the pin. The room remained in a state of stunned, suspended animation. My announcement, delivered with the calm, unshakable authority of a woman who knew she belonged there, had left them all speechless. Jonathan was still frozen across the room, looking as if he had seen a ghost. Ashley was slowly making her way towards us, her white dress a stark contrast to her pale, shocked face. It was her father, Mr. Davenport, a man with a jaw like a granite tombstone and cold, unforgiving eyes, who spoke first. "Jonathan," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, not looking at me but at my son. "A word." He strode across the room, grabbed Jonathan by the arm and pulled him into an adjoining library, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. The silent, public execution had begun. Ashley finally reached me, her bridesmaids trailing behind her like a flock of nervous pastel-colored birds. "Harriet," she whispered, her voice a mixture of shock and a dawning horrified suspicion. "What are you doing here? Jonathan told us you were unwell, that you couldn't possibly travel." "Oh, I am unwell, baby," I said, patting her hand, my voice full of a warm, tragic sympathy. "I have a broken heart, but I would have crawled all the way to Boston on my hands and knees before I would have missed the day my only son got married. My performance was perfect. I was the loving, determined mother who had defied the odds and her son's overprotective wishes to be present at his wedding. I was a figure of maternal devotion, not a lunatic who had escaped her keepers." The library doors opened and Jonathan emerged, his face ashen, his father-in-law following close behind, his expression thunderous. Jonathan came towards me, a frantic, desperate look in his eyes. "Mother," he hissed, his voice a low, panicked whisper. "What is the meaning of this? You can't be here. You're supposed to be—" "I'm supposed to be where my son is on his wedding day," I interrupted, my voice still loud enough for those around us to hear. "And I am so proud of you, Jonathan. So very proud." I reached out and squeezed his hand. His was cold and clammy. The band, sensing a cue, began to play again. The party, slowly, awkwardly, began to resume, but the atmosphere had changed. I was now the center of it, a fascinating, tragic, and deeply mysterious figure. I was introduced to Ashley's family, and I was charming. I was witty. I was everything Jonathan had told them I was not. And then it was time for the toasts. The best man gave his speech. The maid of honor gave hers. Mr. Davenport gave a short, clipped, and noticeably cool toast to the new couple. And then I asked for the microphone. A new, electric silence fell over the room. Jonathan looked as if he were about to be physically ill. Ashley just stared, her face a mask of dread. Florence pushed my wheelchair to the front of the room, next to the small stage where the band was set up. A young man handed me the microphone. I held it in my good right hand. It felt familiar. It felt like home. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice amplified by the speakers filling the grand ballroom. It was not the powerful, bluesy belt of my youth, but it was clear, steady, and full of a lifetime of soul. "For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Harriet Dubois. I am the mother of the groom." I smiled, my lopsided, beautiful smile. "I have loved this boy since the moment I first held him in my arms. I have watched him grow from a curious child in the back streets of New Orleans to the powerful, successful man he is today, standing here in this palace in Boston. And like any mother, my greatest wish for my son has always been his happiness." I turned my wheelchair to face Ashley. "Ashley," I said, my voice softening, "you are a vision. And you have made my son very, very happy. And for that I thank you." I paused, letting the warmth of my words fill the room. I had them. The entire audience was in the palm of my hand. "A wedding is a time for gifts," I continued. "And I have a very special gift for my son tonight. A gift from his father." I looked directly at Jonathan. His eyes were wide with a new, dawning terror. He knew what was coming. My late husband, Marcus, as some of you may know, was a man of music, but also a man of great foresight. He loved his son more than anything, but he also worried. He worried that in Jonathan's great ambition to conquer the world, he might lose a piece of his own soul. So he left a gift for him. A substantial trust fund to be given to him on his 40th birthday. A wedding gift, as it turns out. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Ashley's eyes widen. This was the confirmation she had been waiting for. "But my Marcus," I said, my voice growing stronger, more powerful, "attached a condition to this gift. A test of character. A morality clause. And as the sole trustee of that fund, it is my duty and my honor to read it to you tonight." I reached into the small, elegant bag in my lap and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. It was a notarized copy of the clause. I unfolded it and I began to read. I held the microphone in one hand and the paper in the other, my voice ringing through the silent, cavernous ballroom. The words on the page were not just legal jargon. They were a father's final, desperate plea to his son, a moral compass from beyond the grave. "The principle of this trust," I read, my voice clear and deliberate, "shall be disbursed to my son Jonathan Dubois on the occasion of his 40th birthday, provided that the following conditions are met to the sole and absolute satisfaction of the trustee, his mother, Harriet Dubois." I paused and looked directly at Jonathan. His face was a pale, sweaty mask of pure terror. He was trapped, a captive audience at his own public execution. Condition 1, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. The beneficiary, Jonathan Dubois, must have demonstrated a consistent and unwavering commitment to personal and professional integrity. He must be a man whose word is his bond, whose dealings are honest, and whose character is beyond reproach. I let that sentence hang in the air for a moment, a silent, damning indictment. Condition 2, I read, my voice now ringing with a powerful, righteous anger. The beneficiary must have shown a deep and abiding respect for the family that raised him and the community from which he came. He must not have allowed his ambition to sever the sacred roots of his own history. I could see Ashley staring at Jonathan now, her face a mixture of confusion and a dawning, horrified suspicion. The charming, ambitious man she had married was being described in a language that was the polar opposite of the man she was beginning to see before her. And condition 3, I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more painful. The beneficiary must have, in all his actions, honored his sacred duty to his mother. He must have provided her with comfort, with support, and with dignity, especially in her time of need. He must have, above all else, shown her the unwavering love and loyalty that a son owes to the woman who gave him life. I finished reading and folded the paper slowly, deliberately. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. It was the silence of 100 wealthy, powerful people holding their collective breath, waiting for the verdict. I turned my wheelchair to face my son. I looked at him, my boy, the man I had loved, the man who had betrayed me in the most cruel and unimaginable way. I looked at him and I saw not a monster but a small, frightened and deeply pathetic man. Jonathan, I said, my voice no longer angry but filled with a deep, weary sadness. As the trustee of your father's estate and as your mother, it is my duty tonight to deliver my judgment. I took a deep breath. On all 3 conditions you have failed. You have failed in your integrity. You have failed in your respect for your own history. And you have failed most profoundly in your duty to your mother. I raised my voice one last time, my words a clear, final, and irrevocable judgment. Therefore, as per the legal and moral instructions of your father, the trust is hereby dissolved. The entirety of its contents will be donated in your name to the New Orleans Musicians Benevolent Fund, so that real artists, people with real soul, can be cared for in their time of need. I set the microphone down. It was done. The aftermath was an explosion of quiet, high society chaos. The wedding reception, the social event of the season, ended in a flurry of whispered conversations and hasty departures. Ashley's father, Mr. Davenport, strode over to Jonathan, said something short and vicious in his ear, and then escorted his daughter from the room, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of humiliation. The wedding was over. The marriage was over. Jonathan's new, perfect life was over before it had even begun. He was left standing alone in the middle of the grand ballroom, a groom without a bride, a son without an inheritance, a man without a soul. He was surrounded by the wreckage of his own ambition, publicly exposed as a cruel, materialistic, and morally bankrupt fraud. Florence wheeled me out of the mansion and into the cool Boston night. I didn't look back. The next day, with the help of a lawyer Florence had on standby, the court order that had imprisoned me was overturned. The evidence of Jonathan's perjury and manipulation was undeniable. I was a free woman. I returned to my home in New Orleans. To my garden. To my music. To my life. Jonathan was left to deal with the fallout of his actions, a man disowned by his new family, a pariah in the society he had so desperately wanted to join, a man with nothing left but his own shame. He had tried to make me feel ugly, broken, and ashamed. He had tried to hide me away, to erase me from his life. But in the end, I was the one who was free, and he was the one trapped in a prison of his own making. The final humiliation was his, and his alone. My name is Harriet Dubois. And my voice in the end was the one that mattered.